everyone, today I'm going to be talking to you guys about Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Women. Okay, so I'll start off by reading my abstract, which essentially summarizes my presentation. Mary Wollstonecraft, an 18th century British writer and philosopher, actively advocated for women's rights through her writing, specifically equal educational opportunities. She grew up with an abusive father, so when her time had come, she set out for her own life. She became publisher Joseph Johnson's translator, and from there she published one of her most famous works, A Vindication of the Rights of Women. In this writing, Wollstonecraft tries to convince the audience to break out of gender norms and move away from the idea that women are below men on the gender hierarchy. She claims that if men and women were educated equally, women would not be dependent on men and could express themselves better individually. She begins by endorsing reason and discussing the downfalls of absolute power, and progresses on to emphasize a woman's worth. From beginning to end, her work revolves around the theme of feminism and why it's important for women to find themselves before giving in to male dominance. Mary Wollstonecraft, born in London on April 27, 1759, was an English writer who advocated women's equality. Her mother died during her preteen years, and she grew up with an abusive father, so she didn't really have anybody to look up to but herself. Therefore, as soon as she was old enough, she set out her own path and started working for Joseph Johnson, where she published her most famous work, Vindication for the Rights of Women, which basically advocated women's equality, which she was known for. This book pressed for educational reforms and equality between the genders to allow for a better future for everybody. In each chapter of the book, Mary preached a new set of values. In the first chapter, she mainly talked about the significance of reasoning and rationality. It ties along with knowledge and virtue. Reasoning makes it superior than other living creatures. She says that all humans, both men and women, should feel they have the power to reason and have opinions, and this goes into the educational system. She says it's important that all females and males be educated at the same level and not be discriminated against because of their genders. She says that if they all have an equal educational opportunities, women would be more independent and realize that they're more than just dishwashers or baby carriers. In her writing, Wollstonecraft stated, "Consequently, the perfection of our nature and capability of happiness must be estimated by the degree of reason, virtue, and knowledge that distinguish the individual and direct the laws which bind society, and that from the exercise of reason, knowledge, and virtue naturally flow is equally undeniable if mankind be viewed collectively." So in this quote, Wollstonecraft is emphasizing that knowledge, reasoning, and virtue are necessary in order to show the full potential of an individual, be it man or woman. If all individuals were to be educated and taught equally, mankind would be viewed as a whole rather than just male supremacy. In chapters 2 to 3 of the book, Wollstonecraft talks about male versus female expectations. Females were taught that they were below men on the gender hierarchy. For females, the most important thing was the way they looked or the way others viewed them. Especially in this time period, they could not exercise their freedoms, and it didn't matter because they were taught that their future would be taking care of her husband and kids. Because women were not educated, they didn't really have the power to reason, which basically led to them not having an opinion at all, because at the end of the day, a female's opinion didn't matter. They just had to listen to the supposedly superior men. Women were seen as delicate, like a flower, as I will show in the next quote, metaphorically, while men were seen as like strongly humanly figures, which really shows that society is like corrupted. The following quote by Wollstonecraft states, "The conduct and manners of women, in fact, evidently prove that their minds are not in a healthy, for like the flowers which are planted in too rich a soil, strength and usefulness are sacrificed to beauty, and the flaunting leaves, after having pleased the fastidious eye, fade disregarded on the stalk long before the season when they ought to have arrived at maturity." This quote by the author is emphasizing that women are disregarded as human beings and seen as less than what men are. They are compared to flowers, ever so delicate, as I mentioned on the last slide. She says that with how things are going, females are essentially useless. All their potential and strength is taken up by how they present themselves. Now we'll be talking about the significance of virtue, especially in this writing. So virtue is morality. It's just basically it's behaving in accordance to high moral standards specifically. Um, in her writing, Wollstonecraft tries to illustrate that virtue does not have to correlate to either gender. She says that we all have the same ability to reason and practice virtue. One gender does not have to override the other. Like Wollstonecraft says, we were all created by one God under the same means, so why should one gender be superior to the other? Instead, we can all come together collectively as a whole and live in a more equal and intellectual environment. Now I'll be talking about the influence of Mary Wollstonecraft's writing. So she was actually one of the first influential feminists. She wrote her work at around like the mid 18th century, but it wasn't released until the mid 20th century. So yeah, it wasn't released until 2 centuries later. However, it did have an impact on how the way women perceive life. Even after reading the book myself, I became a lot more open-minded about my own self-worth and my like the value she was talking about when she talked about like reasoning and rationality, and know that you don't have to change yourself for a man or be a certain way. She's influenced many women overall and even men with this classic. Like I wrote, this book is basically like an eye-opener for many people. It exposes just how ignorant mankind can be, and it reveals what we need to work on in society as a whole to build a better place and environment for everybody to live in. So, does this book still stand the test of time? At this point, you're probably thinking we're in 2020, so sexism doesn't exist. It looks like all women are equal, if not even superior to men. Yes, well, looks can be deceiving because that's just not right. It may seem that way where we live in the US, but around the world it's anything but. There are still countries, especially third world countries, that do not even provide equal educational opportunities for both males and females. This writing can to this day be used to endorse gender equality, especially in the educational system. Furthermore, in a lot of countries, even our own, women aren't equal, and that is shown through women's stereotypes, the wage gap, the fact that there's some countries where women can't even drive by themselves. It's actually insane. But on a completely different note, Mary's book advocated free education for both boys and girls, and in a lot of countries, including the one we reside in currently, that's how it is. So Wollstonecraft set the basis for our modern day educational system. The criticisms made from this book are the same ones that some anti-feminists use today. Many people say that instead of equal rights, these females, want female supremacy and to overrule the men. The true definition of a feminist is somebody who advocates for equal rights between men and women. Like a lot of parties, there are extremists, so there are, in this case, extremist feminists who want more. However, that isn't the main majority case. It's like Wollstonecraft said herself. I do not wish women to have more power than men, but over themselves. Thank you for watching. The end.